Is there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Hi, I'm Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
Oh, and I'm Russell.
And welcome back to the TEFLology podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented today by 4 self-certified TEFLologists.
Okay, so we're lucky enough to be sitting here with Russ Mayne of Based EFL fame. We're in Japan. Russ is jetting off tomorrow, so we're lucky enough to be with him. I've already said that. But,
Must be very lucky.
Really lucky. Russ, do you just want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit more?
Okay, hi. I'm Russell. As you said, I blog at Based EFL, so I'm interested in looking at the kind of research behind some of the things we do in the classroom. I teach in the UK in the University of Leicester. I've taught in Japan before for 5 years. 6 years actually, and Taiwan for 2 years.
Right.
So it's nice to finally see you all the faces I associate with voices.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, it was very kind of you to come all the way to Japan, especially for this podcast as well. That was nice.
And we were talking earlier, we first came across you pretty much as soon as our podcast started.
Yeah.
And we got on Twitter and we noticed there was this guy called Russ Mayne who was talking about us. I can't remember what you said at the time.
I said, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
Because I always want to know what other people's opinions are. And I think Muraneva, is that his name? Muraneva.
Yeah.
I think he listened to it, and you can probably find the tweets, and he said, "Oh yeah, it's interesting, but it's a bit." I think he said it. Someone said it was a bit rough.
A bit rough, yeah.
And I said, "Yeah,
Still
I
is.
agree." So
I remember Rob ringing me up or messaging me, "There's people talking about us." That was like our first steps into the Twitter world.
So you were on the TEFL show recently,
Yes.
talking about evidence-based EFL or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Can't remember, a long time ago.
So not to cover the same ground again, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. You mentioned that you were teaching in Taiwan and Japan for quite a long time, and now you're back in the UK.
Yep.
So the topic for this episode or section, depending on how this edits out, is going home. Yeah, going home after
we haven't
being
done that, have we?
Yeah, well, we haven't done that.
Yeah.
You've done that a little bit.
I've kind of done that, yeah.
I mean, I have been home, but like teaching-wise.
So what happened in your case?
Well, I guess I started my language teaching career proper in France first of all, and then from France I went to Italy, and then from Italy I went to Spain, and then I went back to London, or back to England, and then was in England for about 6 years. So yeah, I guess it was kind of a going home, in as much as England is a home
to someone.
Yeah, to someone.
Actually, I did like a foundation program over the summer about 5 years ago, but I was teaching Japanese students in the UK. So
that was after you'd already been here for a while.
For about 2 years, so it wasn't really any different. It wasn't a proper
The
going
home away from home.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
So, Russ, where did you start your teaching career?
You mean originally, or when I went back home?
Originally.
Oh, so I started Eikaiwa, so a conversation school
In Japan.
GIOS. You might have heard of it.
Yeah.
Heard of it.
Yeah. And then I came back to England, and I actually didn't intend to be a TEFL teacher like so many others.
Yep.
And then I was unemployed for a year.
Okay.
I decided to come back.
Come back to Japan.
And I think I was a jet for 3 years. And then I did my master's in applied linguistics.
Okay.
Yeah.
In a Japanese university?
No, in England. So I went back to England.
Oh, you went back to England for that?
Because it only takes 1 year in England.
Ah, right.
And then I met my now wife, who is Taiwanese. So I went to Taiwan with her for 2 years. And then we said we're going to go somewhere else, either Japan or England, and we just actually chanced it. So we said, okay, we'll go back to England and see if there's work. And there was. Someone had just left.
Okay.
And I got that person's job, and yeah, I've been there for 6 years.
Yeah. I mean, how difficult is it to find work? Because someone came up to me recently and was asking, he was thinking of going back to where he came from, and he was saying, do you think there's a chance of getting a job? And I had no idea. I've never left Japan since I was 22 years old, so, and I'm 23 years old now. So.
I would say that, so two things kind of to answer that. It's very difficult, and I was very lucky, and I didn't realise at the time, because I went back and I thought I'd worked in a place before, and I thought I could get a full-time job there. Right. And actually, unless this person had left, I wouldn't have been able to get a full-time job there. So it was really just coincidental.
And that was a university, or
University of Leicester. And and then nobody joined the department for like 2 years or something after I went back. So it's not like jobs were free flowing.
Yeah.
And EAP, so I teach EAP, and it's quite a small. There's not a huge amount of work, but then, so the second point about that is that there has been in the UK and actually all over the world, I think, a kind of explosion in EAP because a lot of Chinese students have gone to different countries. So our department kind of doubled, maybe even more than that, in size over the 6 years I've been there. But what's happened now is that has started to, I think the international student figures have started to kind of decline, and I think that's worldwide. I'm not sure, but it's mostly the Chinese market. But the Chinese market is starting to. I think there are fewer students coming. The government's making it harder for people to come, and so I think it would be very difficult now to get a job. It's not so difficult to get part-time work, but also it's. The last couple of people we employed, one of them had a PhD. Generally, you'll have a Delta or a Master's or both, and there'll be something else on top of that. Like you'll be a good teacher, or we've watched you teach, and you're good. So it's quite competitive.
Okay.
Are you talking just about universities?
Yes.
Or so you're not talking about like language schools in general?
Yeah, I don't know how hard it would be to work in a language school, but I do know that. Can I swear?
Yeah. Please do. Yeah.
Boost the ratings, actually.
I do know there's some really shitty jobs. And you see them, because this is when I went back and I thought I'll get a job easily in England, and I was unemployed for like. Pretty much the whole year. But you'll see stuff like Director of Studies must have a Delta, London, 19,000 or something. And you think like, you've got to be kidding.
Especially in London,
I mean, you just can't. I don't know how anyone could do that.
Yeah.
£12 an hour. I saw one in my hometown.
Yeah.
So that's rubbish. That's
minimum wage.
That's ridiculous. For the qualifications we have and stuff, like that's not enough.
It was also in one of those, one of those government schemes where you put people into a job and they don't get paid anything, but they get one of those was English language teachers as well.
So that was kind of my experience when I moved back to London. I didn't really know much about the English teaching market there, but I just got a list off the internet of school, and this was before they were. This is before the British Council accreditation was such a big thing, so there were a lot of even more kind of cowboy schools. But anyway, I just got a list and then sent my CV to all of them, and then also walked around and just went in and gave my CV, and anybody who interviewed me, I talked to them obviously, and I fairly quickly picked up work, but like you say, it was terribly paid work, and I also interviewed at a bunch of places where they said to me, this kind of aside, you don't actually have to show up for most of the lessons. People just pay to get the visa and stuff. So
there's a few of those.
Yeah.
I think they've pretty much all been closed.
I think
down
so.
Now. But there was a period where you see like above this kind of kebab shop or something.
Yeah,
English
exactly.
language school.
Well, it used to be on Oxford Street, a lot of them.
Yeah.
But so I consider myself very lucky. I ended up in a small language school, which didn't pay well. But after a few years, I became director of studies. But yeah, I mean, £22,500 a year. And they were very honest with me. They said it's never going to be much more than that, just because of the size of the school.
Well, this is why this is why EAP is so competitive, because there are people who go back and they want to live in England or Scotland or whatever, and they've got maybe like they've married someone abroad, they've got kids, and they want a career.
Right.
And the salaries in EAP are, pretty decent. I mean, we're on grade 7 salaries, which is the same as a lecturer.
Okay.
So you start at around 33,000 and up to like 38,000, and there's a few grade 8s above us who are like on the kind of up to 45,000, etc., etc. So there is a kind of, you've got a career progression, and you can earn quite a good salary. I mean, it's not like a fantastic salary, but it's
better than my salary.
That's one of
but I mean, for if you decided to become a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, you'd be earning like a lot more than that. But I think it's better than a lot of people's salaries in the UK.
That's one of the things about Japan. It's quite stifling. Like, there's not much career progression.
Speak for yourself.
maybe personally, but there's a lot of like short-term contracts and jumping around.
Right.
And like in the UK, have you found it a lot more flexible, or like the working conditions and stuff, the employment conditions?
It's a lot more. So I worked in a university in Taiwan, I worked in a university in Japan, and so I'm working in a university in the UK. And I can only talk about the experiences of those individual universities. When it's interesting because there's been a culture change. I don't know if it's the whole of the UK or just my institution. It might just be my institution. But we started off like, Fridays you might go to the pub at lunch, and but we've had this huge, as I say, expansion in the department and professionalisation, and a lot of opportunities for people to do things. So it's not like, and I've spoken to other people in the EAP world, and it's not a kind of, it's definitely not a DOS. It's people are often working overtime or after hours and doing other projects and doing deltas or PhDs or whatever. One of the things people talk about a lot is like the workload and things like that. It's a big issue in EAP.
And so presumably your job it's not a limited term contract?
No. Yeah. It's I don't know what they call it. Fixed, permanent.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's a big difference. I mean, a lot of us working in Japan, it is 3 years here, 5 years here, and to get that job, which isn't limited term, is that's the thing everyone's going for. Almost regardless of salary. I mean, not regardless, but
in Rob's case.
Yeah.
It's got things like a pension. So and it's a pretty good pension. I think they've changed it now to make it less good. But there are a lot of attractive things about the job. I got a year in Yamanashi, and this is part of so we did 2 weeks in Tohoku University teaching scientists English. And, this is kind of, the flights have been paid for by them. So there's a lot of perks, and they'll send you away for training, and they'll pay for that. And I did a 2-week exam writing course, which was really nice.
How many other lecturers do you work with?
So we're not classed as lecturers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that other departments do class their teachers as lecturers.
Right.
Some don't. There's a kind of range, but they might say, "Oh, you're a lecturer, but pay you 25,000."
Right.
So it's kind of swings and roundabouts.
Yeah.
But in my department, it's difficult. I'd say there's probably about 18 full-time grade 7 teachers, and then there's like 6 or so grade 8 and a grade 9 and a grade 10, and then there's like 4 members of admin staff.
And you have an MA and a Delta?
Yeah.
And do you feel pressure to go for a PhD?
No, I don't. But as I say, like some of the people we've employed recently have got PhDs, and I think there's a kind of almost like an arms race. I think if you got in at a certain time, like if you got in 20 years ago, you could have just had a Delta and you'd be fine. You're not going to get told you have to go away and get something else. But and I think one guy actually has one of our best teachers actually. I think he has. I'm not sure if he even has a degree. So
didn't even finish high school.
No, he finished high school. But, I'm not sure if I've got that right, but yeah, no, I think he doesn't have a degree.
So they don't have those kind of institutional...
They probably do now.
Right,
but,
right. Oh, I see. He started a while ago.
It like when I started, it said MA or Delta is desirable, and now it's like kind of MA Delta.
Yeah.
You've got to have that, and, and they've come out with all these other things that you have to have as well. You've got to have experience working with students from this country and that country. You've got to have I don't know, evidence of professional development and things like that.
I find EAP, like I don't really know much about EAP, but I find it's like being talked about as something separate from English teaching in general.
That's a different topic to get into. But,
I don't know. Should we talk about EAP? I mean,
well, I'd one more thing about the topic of going home, and then we can, if that's all right.
Let's cut this a little bit, and then you do your
So on a slightly more philosophical note, there's that phrase, you can never truly go home, right? I was wondering if you think that that's true in terms of people living abroad and then going back. I remember, for example, Matt, you told me once that when you went back to see some friends in the UK, they were talking about someone on TV, and you said, "Oh, I don't know who that is," and they said, "Oh, that's just someone that we have over here."
Right? Celebrity we have over,
And so I wonder if you've had such a period of discontinuity with life in your home country, whether you can sort of go back and pick things up exactly where.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how relevant I'd be to like my students if I was in the UK now. I don't know if I could actually be relevant to them or not in terms of like culture and local knowledge.
Right.
Especially about they were referring to Channel 4 celebrities. Don't know about that. But,
Channel 4 is a channel that came out in the 80s.
Yeah.
You know what Channel 4 is?
I know what Channel 4 is, but I don't know like the latest. So I don't know how relevant I'd be in general.
Right.
Maybe.
I think it's. I think the first year it's a bit like that. I think you very quickly slip into it, and whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know.
How long has it been since you moved back?
6. Well, I did have this 1 year, 2012, where I was in Japan, but most of the time in the UK, and you bought a house there, and got married, and it's a very typical kind of English life now. I think a more kind of, I think a related question which you get a lot of over there is the kind of, they've got the pension and the job and the salary and stuff, but everybody is always kind of, there's a little kind of topics about, my friend from Turkey has posted this on Facebook, and my friend from Japan is doing cherry blossom viewing, and it looks so good, because if you like England, then, or if you like your home country or whatever, then it's fine, I guess. If there's things in the country that you enjoy, but you can find yourself thinking like, I used to go to onsens, and I used to,
But I wonder if because like when I'm here, sometimes I think, I could be back doing this.
Yeah.
And, I remember when I did my CELTA, one of my tutors said, don't pick the country that you're going to go to based on scenery, because scenery lasts about 2 weeks when you're faced with actually living in a country, So I don't know, maybe it's a kind of the grass is always greener thing.
Yeah, there's probably an element of that, but I think most people become, I could be wrong about this, and tell me if I am, but most people become TEFL teachers because they are people who like to travel, they want to go to other countries and see other cultures, and then, you find yourself in a job where you might be there for the rest of your life in this one country, the country that you were born in, and I think for some teachers it's a little bit, and we have had people leave for that reason, even with all the perks, they've kind of they want to go to a war zone or something, or they want to go to
why wouldn't you?
They want to go to somewhere that a little bit more interesting and different food and all this kind of thing.
When you did your CELTA, anyone, but everybody else on my CELTA course, nobody wanted to go to another country. They all wanted to do it so that they could stay in their hometown and teach local incoming immigrants, perhaps, or students. They all had that interest. Yeah, I remember we had this careers at the end of our CELTA. We had this careers advice. She'd done her CELTA the year before, and she came in to give us advice about what you can actually do with that piece of paper. And at no point did she ever talk about going abroad. It was all about what schools you could work in around West Sussex.
You can turn it into a fancy hat, that piece of paper.
Yeah. She's opened up her own school now, but yeah.
I would say, and you might have to edit this onto like something earlier, but if someone is thinking about going back, what usually happens at our place is if you're happy to do part-time, so if you go into a university and say, I'm looking for some hours, quite often they'll have something. It might be a couple of hours a week, and if you stay there long enough, if you're willing, if you've got the means to kind of, you know, put up with it for a year or 2 years, or maybe, then eventually, usually something will come along, I think.
Right. But, get your foot in the door.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people join us full time that way. I don't think you'll see a job in the, you know, well, you do see jobs advertised, I guess, on jobs.ac UK and stuff, but it's more common for people who we know, known quantities, I guess. Of course.
Again, that's different to Japan. They don't really have that kind of flexibility.
No,
if you're employed as a
do the
part-time,
contract you get.
Yeah. There's not that kind of overlap.
So for the second section, depending on how the edit turns out, we're going to talk about EAP. So Russ, you're teaching EAP. And you taught non-EAP stuff before?
Yeah.
What would you say the difference is between the two?
Well, first of all, what is EAP?
So EAP is English for academic purposes. And it's basically kind of teaching students who have, well, it covers a range of things, but it's quite a lot of the work is teaching students who have arrived in the UK to do an academic course. Their English is either good enough or not quite good enough to enter the university, and you'll either give them support for their academic writing and other things, or you'll kind of get them up to the level. So quite often the students will arrive with 5.5 in IELTS, and they need 6.5, so they do like a 10-week or something pre-sessional course, we call it. And if they pass that course, they kind of get an unconditional offer. Or well, actually, they get a conditional offer, and if they pass the course, it becomes an unconditional offer.
And then, but once they get that 6.5 in IELTS,
they don't get 6.5 in IELTS. We are the kind of alternative to the 6.5 in IELTS.
Oh, so they don't do IELTS again? No. Okay,
it's quite an interesting point.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, will they still take EAP courses afterwards?
Some of them, yeah. I mean, it depends. Every institution does something differently. I mean, EAP is a very... a lot of things called EAP, which are very, very different in the UK, and the way it's done is different. There isn't much kind of uniformity among them. Some places will have like kind of mandatory courses for international students, which we don't do, because, you know, if you're getting a degree and it's the same qualification, how can you get non-native speakers to force them to do a language course? We have kind of optional courses students can take if they want help with their writing. We also have general English courses, so speaking and grammar, but it's academic grammar and academic speaking. And we teach Erasmus students as well. So sometimes we teach on credit-bearing courses. I teach on the MA TESOL, which is credit bearing. I teach one of the kind of practical units for that.
I have a question related to EAP. Why is it that some teachers, like, they kind of identify themselves as EAP teachers?
Yeah, it's very interesting actually.
I don't know how that whole dichotomy between ELT and EAP has come about, when really it's all the same.
Is EAP better?
Yeah, it's an interesting question actually. I'm not sure that many of the top kind of EAP people will listen to this podcast, so I can be quite candid.
Huge fans.
There's a kind of I would call it, and I'm sure that they wouldn't agree with this, but I think there's a kind of snobbery to some extent. We had a talk actually once. Quite a famous person in EAP came and talked to us at our university, and she said she thought that you should have a PhD if you want to teach EAP. That should be a kind of requirement, and that there were two types of EAP teachers: the ones who've been doing it for 5 years, who were novice EAP teachers, and then there were the kind of professional EAP teachers. And there's also the BARLEAP mailing list, which is the BARLEAP is the British Association of Lecturers in English for Academic Purposes. And quite often the discussions which get people really excited and cause a lot of mail are discussions about whether or not what our titles are.
Right.
So, I'm a tutor, but someone else is a lecturer, and we should all be lecturers, and this kind of thing. And so there's a kind of, and there's often discussions about the fact that the academy doesn't respect us, and we need to, we're academics, and we should. I don't know. I think there are a lot of people, or I think actually, I don't know if I'm right about this, but I think there's a minority of people who talk about this a lot, and I think there's a majority perhaps of people in EAP who don't feel the same way but don't say anything. That's my feeling. I could be wrong about that.
What do you think they feel?
Well, I think that they don't have such a problem with it.
Right.
But I think there are some people who feel like, because you're in a university and you're teaching academic English, you're an academic.
Right.
And they do publish papers. Some of them. They don't. I mean, we don't have to in Leicester. I guess it's understandable, but I think it does lead to this kind of, as you say, this notion that EAP teachers are better than TEFL teachers, and one of the kind of results of that, I think, or one of the effects of that, is that there's often a move away from English teaching towards skills teaching or content teaching.
Right.
And this is a big kind of another area which is quite people talk about a lot. What should the balance be? And I'm very much on the side of. I hope no one's listening. I'm very much on the side of language. Like, I think we should be teaching them English, and I think we should supplement that with skills. And I've got friends.
What do you mean by skills in this?
Things like paragraph organisation, citation, referencing. The reason I say that is because the English will only actually get them so far. If they plagiarise, they're out of there. If they can't structure a paragraph, they'll lose far more than if they spell something wrong or get the grammar a bit wonky.
Isn't there a point where those two meet, though? For example, like when you say paragraph organisation, something like how to write a topic sentence.
Yeah. We teach all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but that's kind of a language and also a skill, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there are some people who, like a good friend of mine, and she is far more over to the content side of things, and she thinks, she would argue, I think, I'm not really sure, but she would probably argue without content, you're wasting your time.
You mean in terms of EAP?
Yeah. So if you're teaching media students, you should teach them about media, and it shouldn't just be like the language should come from the content.
It's kind of like CLIL, a stronger form of CLIL.
Yeah. Actually, it's a shame the guy I was with didn't come, because he did a plenary talk about this, about the kind of spectrum that you've got, all the way from kind of bolt-on language support all the way to kind of CLIL.
Yeah.
And all of those are represented within EAP.
Right.
So it's difficult to say, but yeah, I do think there is a kind of, we're not just TEFL teachers, and sometimes you'll hear comments to that extent, like, oh, well, that's a very TEFL-y thing.
There are now MAs in EAP. Like, some of our friends are doing MAs and just EAP alone.
Yeah.
I wonder what their courses are like, actually.
Should encourage them to start EA-apology. EA-apology podcast.
Apology being highlighted there.
Right.
Yeah.
They put the apology back in it.
I wonder what their jingle would be. They wouldn't have a jingle.
No.
They'd have some classical music.
Right.
Radio 3.
How about your actual students? How do they kind of approach the idea of taking EAP courses? I mean, obviously they must be really aware that they are there for academic reasons, but do they deviate and want to just kind of do more other stuff in the class, or?
I think this is another one. This is another area where the pro content people win a little bit, because we find increasingly, that when you teach, when you say, okay, today we're going to do a presentation on your subject area, the students are much more motivated.
Okay.
And I think quite often they're learning English, but they don't really want to learn. I mean, they want to learn English, but their goal is to get the master's degree or the PhD.
Yeah.
So.
And they don't necessarily I mean, I'm sure they see the link, but that link isn't so strong in their minds.
Right. It depends on the student, but I mean, quite often they want enough English to get onto their course.
Right.
But and also, you know, this is the thing with EAP. You know for a fact that they will never have enough English. You know, it's an impossibility for most of the students, because even at IELTS 6.5, they're reading academic texts.
Yeah.
So it's a struggle for even native speakers.
I was actually going to ask. So you said that you also offer like support to the students. How much support are you allowed to give to students in the production of their own work?
So we give them. There are some rules. We can't help them, for example, with their. I mean, I run the management. I teach the management students. We divide it up into different departments, but they have something called an FOK, which is the first trial essay they write.
Right.
And we're not allowed to kind of give them any help with that, because it's kind of like the department has said, you know, they want to see what they can do, that kind of thing. But later essays, they get a tutorial, so they can come and have like a 20-minute tutorial with us. And what we'll generally do is we have like departmental rules, so we can mark one page for errors, and then give them advice about others. But you can't kind of, you know, proofread everything and tell them that their arguments. Well, I suppose I would stay away from telling them that their argument's weak, perhaps.
Right.
I don't know, actually.
So there are limits, but they're kind of fuzzy limits.
There are fuzzy limits.
And when you say error correction, you'll correct grammar mistakes and spelling
with a
mistakes,
correction code.
Right.
Which is something actually we're researching at the moment. The department's doing a whole kind of bit of research into how effective these correction codes are.
Right.
Do you work from like a particular style, like APA or?
Yeah, it's mostly Harvard.
Any other style, Harvard.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it depends. Museum studies and law use like a different system, like a footnote system. But I don't teach them, so thank God I don't have to go anywhere near that.
I'd have thought it would have been APA. So when I teach my students, I always teach them APA style, because that seems to be the most sort of common one.
Although nobody sticks to it 100%. But
No.
Do you mark essays yourself?
I marked essays for the MAT SOL.
Right. Okay.
Which was quite it was quite hard going actually, because I sometimes I don't know if you guys are the same, but you sometimes think, oh, you know, what if I get a PhD and become a lecturer? You know, that'll be like quite a nice life. But this marking it changed my mind about that.
I started teaching not graduate students. That's this year, but last year I started teaching thesis students. So I had my own students who were doing their undergraduate theses, and and it was really difficult, because like they're in Japan for one thing. These are students who've chosen to write their theses in English, but yeah, it's really difficult, because they all want to do different things connected to English that maybe I don't know anything about, but I have to mark it because I'm the only one who knows who's English, who can, you know, I'm the only native speaker who can do it.
Right.
So yeah, it's really difficult marking the thesis and stuff.
Do you find it like, because you've obviously taught a lot of different skills throughout your course, when you're marking papers, is it really clear to see, well, that comes from something that I or our group of teachers taught this particular skill?
That's a really interesting
would that kind of bias your marking?
Well, okay, so those things are separated which is quite interesting. So the students who I'm teaching a credit-bearing course to, I'm teaching a content course.
Right. Okay.
But those students also come to us and have a language support course.
Okay.
Which is
What's that?
quite unusual, because most of the students we have so I'll have the media, or we'll have the media students and we'll give them language support. We don't teach them media.
Right.
We'll have the management students and we'll teach them language. We give them language support. We don't teach them management. But with the TESOL students, they come to us twice.
Right.
Because they get the content and then they'll also get the language support. So their language support teacher might have taught them English. I absolutely won't teach them English, because some of the students aren't international students, so it would be kind of really strange for me to say to
them. In an EAP course, typically, I mean, obviously, it's not going to be pure EAP. I mean, you do things like grammar and vocabulary and other writing skills that might be applicable to non-academic contexts. Like, what percentage do you think is very specific to academic English in an EAP course?
What percentage? Well, at least 50%.
Okay.
Because the writing and... Actually, I wonder if less than that. But I was going to say the writing and the reading. But I think the reading actually has a lot of crossover with general EFL. Because it's kind of skimming, scanning, which I've, railed against in the past.
Yeah.
And I think we've kind of perhaps moved away from a little bit, departmentally. I don't know if there's any connection between those two things. It's probably not. The summer courses have 5 modules: so speaking, reading, writing, listening, and a project.
Okay.
So they write in the afternoon as like an academic piece of writing, and that's really the most academic of the work they do. The listening, I mean, you could say they listen to lectures, so you could say it's academic listening, but is it?
Right.
The writing is the most.
Okay, thank you very much for listening today.
As usual, if you'd like to get in contact with us, you can send an email to teflology@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter @teflology, or you can go to our Facebook page, which is the TEFLology podcast on Facebook. You can also check out our website, which is teflology-podcast.com. So it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
I think that's fine to keep in though.
I think we can beep his name.
I think we should put it out.
I do not give them permission
We should put it out.
air these parts.
I'll cut it out after the discussion of the stuff we said we'd discuss, and all this stuff
really?
I'll cut out. Yeah, I'll cut it all out. I'll put it at the end.
Keep it to bribe me with later.
Yeah,
I'll listen back to it later.
it's alright. We're all being mean.
Where we go next?
No, do not put any of this out.